Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. Friends, in today's episode, we are going to be talking about planned giving with Tony Martignetti. And this might be the first time I have ever recorded an episode literally from my dining room table. So Tony happened to be in the area and said, "Hey, can I stop by?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, yes, of course. And let's record an episode." So we are sitting at the dining room table because my podcast studio is a little bit too small for both of us to fit in there. Now, let me just share with you a little bit about Tony. So Tony is a nonprofit celebrity, a thought leader, and a planned giving guru. Now, you might be saying to yourself, "Dolph, nonprofit celebrity, what do you mean?" Well, Tony has nonprofit radio, which is, well, you have probably heard of Tony Martignetti's nonprofit radio. That is the first nonprofit podcast I ever listened to, and probably the oldest continuously running nonprofit podcast, not just in the nation, in the world. Now, Tony, in addition to having that podcast, is also a planned giving guru. Several years ago, he started the Planned Giving Accelerator, which is a membership community that helps nonprofits like yours, start and grow their planned giving programs. You also know Tony from our recent planned giving webinar that we hosted with him. And when we were doing that webinar, I instantly knew that we had to have him back on the show. Tony, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again.
Dolph, thank you for hosting, and thanks to everybody for listening. Thank you for welcoming me to your home in this beautiful space, and I get to see you face to face. I love the face to face. Thanks very much, Dolph.
Well, thank you. As I shared to you, like most people that moved here downsized, we upsized. We moved from like 900 square feet to something about a little over twice that. So never thought I'd live in such a nice place. So thank you. I will share with you, Tony, in preparation for our conversation today, I went back and looked because I know we've had you on the podcast a couple of times, and I went back and looked at the most recent time. And the last time when we were talking about planned giving, we talked about things like, hey, at what point should an organization start one? And we discussed, about at least 5 years in, and you have to have some individual donors. What age should people be at when you start to have those conversations? I was really interested to learn that it's 55 to 60, but that there's no cap. You could be having that conversation at 85 or 90. And then we talked about who are the first people to ask. So I know we've covered that territory. I'm hoping we can cover some new territory this time. And of course, we'll link to your last episode in the show notes.
Sounds great. I'm following your lead.
Awesome. So let me ask you, why should a cash-strapped small nonprofit that seems to feel like they're struggling with fundraising every year, why should they stop and take the time to engage in planned giving?
That's a very good question. And it's one that's common, unfortunately. I understand that situation when there are immediate needs. And, so why should we focus on the future? You're running a nonprofit business, and you have to think about the long term of that business. You're even incorporated in your state as a not-for-profit corporation. I understand the immediate needs, but you also need to be focused on the long term. Planned giving is not something that needs to take even 10 hours a week. You don't even need to spend 5 hours a week to start talking to folks, the right folks, as you were describing, about planned gift commitments. But I do think every nonprofit should be concerned about their long term, their sustainability, the continuation of their work in their community for decades and even generations to come. And that's where planned giving has value. It helps that sustainability by helping you grow or launch your endowment, that savings account that we only spend the income from, and maybe not even all the income every year. But you have to be concerned about the long term for your nonprofit business.
So it's interesting. I heard you say, hey, you should be doing planned giving for an endowment. And I have seen several organizations that get a windfall. For some organizations, that's $50,000. For some, it's $500,000. And they say, ooh, we have this hole in our budget. Let's use that to plug it. And then of course they use it to plug it. And in 2 years' time, they end up with a deficit again. So talk to me about that strategy of using planned giving as a way to really grow and feed an endowment.
The vast majority of planned gifts come unrestricted. And when you launch planned giving the way you and I talked about in the last episode and in the webinar just recently, which is starting with charitable bequests, those simple gifts and wills, I can again guarantee you that the vast majority of the gifts, up over 90%, are going to be simple, unrestricted gifts of cash. And I am, you might have overstated the introduction, but like celebrity and guru, but I'm the self-appointed evangelist of planned giving. And as such, I encourage nonprofits to put as much as possible of those unrestricted dollars that come in those simple gifts and wills into endowment. If you can only do 50% because you got to make payroll next week, and after you've gotten this, you use the example of 50,000 or 500,000. I'll agree with that. I've seen those. I've seen larger. And I'll just share with folks that the average charitable bequest in the US is $35,000. And if there are any folks in Canada listening, I'm sure our northern neighbors are as generous or more generous. So I would be comfortable with a figure right around that for our Canadian friends too. So when that unrestricted money comes, whatever the gift amount, I urge you to put as much as possible into the long term, into that endowment. If you can only do 50%, you just, as I said, the operational needs, the immediate needs, payroll is coming and we're short. We're trying to buy land. The lease payment is due. Interest payments are due. Whatever it is, we have a program that is struggling that we have to invest in some equipment for. I understand all those immediate needs. Take what you need and but in addition, put as much as you can into endowment. You'll be thankful in the long run. Your successors will thank you. Your successors will thank you. Again, sustainability. How important it is in your community that your work continues for decades and generations.
So talk to me about how organizations develop that discipline, because I've been an executive director of an organization when it got an unexpected bequest. It was for about $50,000. And I do remember it felt like a real struggle for us to go, oh yeah, let's put this in our donor advised fund of the community foundation, which was kind of our endowment, if you will. So it was a real struggle, like, oh yeah, let's put all 50 in instead of, oh, let's take 25 out and do this cool thing. So what recommendations do you have for organizations so they have the discipline of saying, oh, we're so grateful for this bequest, now let's save it for the future?
I don't see a magic bullet. I mean, other than to be disciplined. That's the perfect word. Be thoughtful about it. Don't spend it immediately. You got this windfall. Let's say the person even was one of the 7 out of 8 who does tell you that you're in their will. Because for every one you know about, there's another 7 to 8 gifts and wills that you don't know about. It's just so private and so personal to some people, to the majority of people, obviously, that vast majority, that for every one you know about, there's another 7 to 8 who have you in their will, but they're not going to tell you. It's just too personal. So, but let's say this is one that you did know about. The person told you during their life that your nonprofit is in their will. Naturally, you don't know when they're going to die. So you find out that they've died, this windfall comes. Let's use your example of $50,000. Be thoughtful about how you allocate it. Don't just on a whim say, let's spend it. Be thoughtful. Maybe the board should be involved. I would say at least board leadership. I mean, if $50,000 is a major gift to you and it's now come as a surprise, I would say at least your board leadership, if not the full board, should be involved in how to allocate that. But be thoughtful, be conscious of what you're doing with this windfall. Be thinking about your sustainability. There's so much talk on the social networks about sustainability. Well, there's also, be the change you want to see in the world, right? Well, you have to be disciplined. Start to be the change. You may have to have a difficult conversation with maybe some of your board members want to spend it all. Or maybe some on the other side want to put it all into endowment and not spend any of it for operations. maybe the folks who think in different ways, maybe neither of them will be 100% satisfied. If you split it, however you do it, 65, 35, 65 endowment and 35 operations, or even the other way around. Just be thoughtful, be disciplined about how you spend this windfall. Don't jump at something. Be thoughtful, because it is a lot of money and the future is important.
You said something I really want to ping off of, that only 1 in 8 planned gifts that my organization receives, I will be expecting. I will know about ahead of time. 7 and 8, I won't. Here's my question. First of all, how did they learn that they could leave something for my organization in their will? And then how did they decide to do that? Have I had a conversation with them? Like, how did they get to that point?
They saw your marketing and your promotion around gifts and wills. And I just want to clarify, it's specific to gifts and wills, because there are a lot of planned gifts where the donor has to tell you, like a charitable gift annuity, for instance. You have to know about that because there are agreements that go back and forth. But this is specific to gifts and wills. So folks see your marketing and your promotion, and they even see your encouragement to let us know. Please let us know if you've included us. But for everyone that does let you know, there's another 7 to 8. They're close to your organization. They're just not sharing with you that they've included you in their will. They're very, very likely to be continuing other giving, because we do know that on average, 75% of folks who include you in their will increase their other giving. So in case you have naysayers at your nonprofit, hopefully they're not on your board, who say, oh, now I'm channeling the naysayers, like whiny, oh, you're going to kill our other fundraising. People are going to put us in their wills and it's going to be awful because all our other fundraising is going to dry up. Everything else is going to stop. We can't do planned giving. It's going to be terrible. All right. So that's unfortunate, unkindly channeling. I don't have a lot of sympathy for naysayers, the people who think about why we shouldn't instead of how we can. I like to look at how we can rather than the negative. I've got 2 instances of how I know that lots and lots of folks will increase their other giving. And this is directly to your question. This includes the 7 to 8 for the everyone you know about. The other 7 to 8 who just won't tell you. It's just so private and personal to them. This is my 27th year in planned giving, since 1997. I've seen thousands of people who have told us we are in their will, and they have increased their other forms of giving, whether it's monthly or major gifts that they do, or end of year. And why is that? Because they feel so close to us. Because, Dolph, what have they done when they include us in their will? They've put us right alongside their partner, husband, wife, children, grandchildren. Right alongside the grandchildren, there's a gift for our nonprofit. That's an exalted place for our nonprofit to be. And they feel that close. That's how much they love you. You're alongside their partner and their grandchildren. So there's that. There's my 27 years of anecdotes. You might say, Tony Martignetti, lots of anecdotes, worthless. Quarter century of anecdotes, but they're just that. So then I would refer you to the research of Professor Russell James at Texas Tech University. He quantitatively studies planned giving fundraising. It's his area of research. And one of his research projects was to see how planned giving impacts other giving. And he surveyed hundreds of nonprofits and found that on average, 75% of folks who tell you that they've included you in their will, and this again is specific, his research in this project was specific to charitable bequests. They've told you that you're in their will, 75% of those folks increase their other giving to that charity. So that applies for the one that tells you and the other 7 to 8 that don't. It won't hurt your other fundraising. And that's why those other folks are out there. It's just, if we have time, I have a little story. I don't know.
We have time, but I just want to say real quick.
Okay.
You say 27 years of anecdotes. That's 27 years of experience. Let me just say.
Yeah, I'm being self-deprecating. The safest person to make fun of is me. So, because
okay.
I'll never complain about my own sense of humor. So yeah, I'm being a little sarcastic, but in case folks aren't moved by 27 years, you have Professor James to fall back on.
So please tell us the story.
I was doing training for a board on planned giving fundraising. And the night before, I was invited to a cocktail party of board members and some other folks, major donors. And one of the women I met said that, sometimes in my line of work, knowing why I was there, the subject of wills comes up in cocktail parties. So it's not that I'm raising it. I'm not a bore. Don't be afraid to invite me to your next party. I don't start talking to people about wills, but everybody knew why I was there because of the training the next day. So this woman shared with me that she had 6 friends in her will, and she wasn't going to tell any of the friends. She didn't want to be treated any differently. It was, again, just so private for her. She didn't want folks to know. And in case she needed to change her mind, she didn't want her dear friends to know now. And even though we can change our minds, we can change our minds about our wills anytime. But she just felt that she incurred a moral obligation not to change her mind. And these are dear friends that she wouldn't share it with. So that kind of goes to why folks might not share with you that they have your nonprofit in their will. Again, so private, they don't want to be treated differently, and they take on a moral obligation not to change their mind in case they have to. But statistically, very few folks do. It's like 4% of people take a charity out of their will. But that's just a little story about why those 7 to 8 might not tell you.
So you also share with me that those 7 to 8 folks that don't tell me, they just found out about it through our marketing material that happened to promote planned giving. What does that look like?
Oh, be multi-channel. You can use your annual report as a method of recognizing donors and also inviting other folks to join them. Direct mail does very well for planned giving. The digital channels do very well. So email campaigns, direct mail campaigns, website, not so much. I mean, I don't see a lot. I mean, you should have 1 or 2 pages devoted to planned giving. Really, 1 page is probably enough, especially when you're just launching. You're not going to get a lot of gifts through your website. But, either digital or print campaigns, drop a buck slip. Like buck slip, by that I mean a third of a page. Drop a third of a page, like a little sidebar, into other mailings about how easy it is for folks to include you in their will. So there's some easy marketing promotion. Oh, events, when you can spare, you really only need 60 to 90 seconds to explain that you're now focusing on the long term, your sustainability, you're encouraging gifts and wills. It's so easy for you to do. Please consider doing it. So drop some remarks into the other remarks for your CEO or your board chair, whoever the keynote speaker is at your next event.
I love those. I would also imagine maybe celebrating the planned gifts you get.
That you could do that through the annual report. I would encourage you to have a recognition society for planned giving with people's consent, of course. You publicize that list of names, celebrate that list, those folks who are in your recognition society. Absolutely.
One of the things I just thought about, and by the way, Tony, I'm going to be self-deprecating for a minute. This is a sign I'm no longer a young person. One of my favorite shows is CBS Sunday Morning. And every Sunday morning, they do the in memoriam. So these are the people who died in the last week. I also just had this moment when I thought, oh yeah, you could even do an in memoriam at your gala. So, so if 1 or 2 donors passed away in the last year and left you in their will, you could do an in memoriam for them at your gala.
Absolutely. Gala, any other event. Please just take a moment. We'd like to recognize these folks who have died and remembered us in their long-term plan. Yeah, wherever it fits.
I'm also always surprised whenever I get, and I know I don't get donor remittance envelopes the way I used to, but whenever I get those donor remittance envelopes and it does not have a box for me to check that says, oh, I've left you in my will, even though, and I think last time I shared with you, there's 5 or 6 organizations that are in my will, but even though I've never checked that box, I've always just had a conversation. It's a nice reminder. Oh yeah, I could do something in my will for that organization.
Absolutely. Either on the form that they send back, a little checkoff box that just says, send me information about including your organization name in my will. Another place you could put that is on the reply envelopes, on the flap. Now, not the BREs, the business reply envelopes, because the post office is very particular about what goes on those envelopes. But other reply envelopes that have your address pre-printed that you send to folks for them to reply to you, on the back flap, put a little checkoff box. Send me info on including your organization in my will.
And one of the things that I think I hear from you is those don't cost a nonprofit anything extra. If they're already printing the BRE, if they're already printing the annual report or sending something out, that just saying, hey, you could leave us in your will costs nothing extra. So it's something the cash-strapped nonprofit could do.
Precisely. Those remittance envelopes you mentioned. Yeah. Next time you do a print run of envelopes, put it on the back flap. Doesn't cost anything extra. You're printing the envelopes anyway. You're printing reply cards anyway. Add an extra checkoff. Send me information. That person is then self-selecting that they are interested in a planned gift, and gifts and wills are the place to start.
Now, you've mentioned doing some training with boards. If you could just get every board to do 2 or 3 things for planned giving, or every board member of an organization to do 2 or 3 things for planned giving, what would they be?
Well, number one would be include the organization in your will. I like to see, and I routinely advocate for 100% participation on the board in planned giving. And the easiest way to do that is a gift in their will. If they choose some other method, IRA beneficiary, maybe they're younger and they have a 401k or an IRA, they want to name you as a beneficiary. Terrific. I'm not discriminating against other planned gifts. I just think I know for a fact wills are the place to launch because they're so simple. But whatever planned gift method your various board members choose, I think there should be 100% participation. After that, easy lift. Send thank you notes to the planned giving donors that you do have. And not necessarily just when they've told you that they've included you, but some random time, some 6 months or a year after that. Hopefully you're keeping in touch with these insiders in other times too throughout the year. But a thank you note from a board member. You could take 10 minutes at the beginning or end of a board meeting for every board member to write a note. Thanks so much for including us in your long-term plan. What donor is not going to love to get a handwritten note from a board member? So there's 2 things.
And as you've mentioned, almost all of your planned giving donors are current donors as well. So you're not just saying, oh, thank you for including us in your long-term plan. You're really saying, thank you for supporting us in so many ways.
Absolutely. Yep. Because you're right. We've talked about this in the past. You're talking to your loyal, committed donors about a gift in their will. Those are your very, very best prospects.
Tony, years ago, I was the development director of an organization. When I say years ago, this is about the time you started doing planned giving, by the way. But so
around 1997?
Yeah, like 97, 98, 99, something like that. But I was the development director of an organization, and we had a program that we called 5 for Food and Fuel. And it's people who would write us $5 checks. Again, this is back in the old days. There was not a lot of online giving back then. So people who would write us a $5 check every month for food and fuel. And when I say for food and fuel, that those were funds that we set aside so that we could help people with past due utility payments, and we could provide food to people. And almost every one of those donors was retired. And you could tell that in part because, you can tell sometimes through someone's handwriting that this is an older person.
You can tell sometimes you can see that the handwriting is painful.
Yeah.
It looks like it was an arthritic hand that wrote the check.
Yeah. And I stepped in there as the development director, and I remember saying, oh my gosh, we have people who've been giving us $5 every month for years, in some cases a decade. I was like, every one of these is a planned giving prospect. Like, yeah, they're not going to write us a check for $10,000 today, but they might leave us $10,000 in their will.
Absolutely right. Yep. Those long-term, committed, loyal donors. A monthly gift of $5, and they've been doing it for a decade. That's 120 gifts over 10 years. Of course. Yes.
Now, I will share with you the biggest hurdle that we had inside that organization was the willingness to talk to those donors about planned giving.
Okay. That may be because of a common misconception that planned giving is a death conversation. I can't talk to my donors about their death. I'd like to turn that on its head, 180 degrees, and explain that it's actually a conversation about life, the life of your nonprofit. We're going back to the life and the sustainability of your nonprofit work in your community. Because, Dolph, that's what you have in common with your donors. And again, we're talking to your most loyal, committed donors. That means we know that they love your work. Well, you love your work too. Otherwise, you need to work at a different agency or leave nonprofits. If you're not passionate about the work that your nonprofit is doing, you're not going to be a successful fundraiser. So let's dismiss that possibility because it's highly unlikely. You each love your work. That's what you have in common. That's the core of your conversation. It's not a conversation about death. It's about the life of your nonprofit work in your community. How can they continue that life? That's why you're talking to them about a gift in their will. So not to fear these conversations. And folks who are 55 to 60 and over, they're ready to have these kinds of conversations. When they are your committed, loyal donors, roughly that age or older, they're ready. You're not going to get a hang up on the phone. They're not going to slap you in the face. The worst that's going to happen is they would say that, no, I love your work, but my estate is devoted elsewhere for my family. Maybe I have a child or children with special needs. Or I love your work, but just not that much to put you in my will. Everybody's not going to say yes. I'm lining you up with the people who are most likely to say yes. They're your committed, loyal donors, and they're 55 to 60 and over. And you might say, well, why not, as some folks do, why not go younger? What about folks in their 30s and 40s? They might include you in their will. They might. My concern is whether that gift is going to remain in their will until their death. If a 30-year-old puts you in their will, they've got a 60, 70-year life expectancy. That's a pretty heavy stewardship burden, 60, 70 years of stewardship. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying it's a very, very heavy lift. So I would like to set you up with the folks who are most likely to say yes, and that there would still be a gift at their death for your nonprofit. And that's those folks I just mentioned.
And I just have to say, but that 33-year-old board member better put something in the will for your organization because they're on the board.
You're spot on.
Sorry,
Yes,
had to say it.
I would waive the age, I don't want to call it a restriction, the age recommendation, strong recommendation for board members. You're right on. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one final thing I want us to talk about before we get to Two Truths and a Lie. I know that you do a nonprofit accelerator. By the time this episode airs, it's closed for the year. It's a 3-month accelerator, starts in March, because that means it ends sometime toward the end of May. I just want to make sure that my friends who are listening know more about your accelerator. What happens during that 3-month span?
It's Planned Giving Accelerator. Thank you very much for mentioning it. I guide small and mid-sized nonprofits through the process of launching planned giving at their nonprofit. We meet in a group setting online on Zoom, and I set those meetings up each week. We meet once a week for an hour for the 3 months. I set them up in Zoom as meetings, not as webinars. So folks are talking back and forth to each other constantly. There's lots of peer learning and peer support beyond the learning that I'm giving every week after week. So, and that way, you're not typing your questions into the chat box. You just blurt it out. I'm from New Jersey, New York, close to New York City. You can't offend me by interrupting me. So you have a question in the accelerator, you just yell it out, and we'll get it. We'll deal with it right there. So the vibe is casual, friendly, fun, professional. Those things can coexist, I believe. Professional and fun and lively. Absolutely. That's the intersection I like to work at. And so that's what we're doing over the 12 weeks. I'm explaining how to launch planned giving at your nonprofit. Some folks do the work as we're learning it, and others are using it for the future. Some campaign or some planned giving launch they have planned for the future.
And so if someone participates in the Planned Giving Accelerator, I'm just curious, typically, are they one of 1,000 people, one of 100 people? Like how many people are in the accelerator a year?
The classes are like 15 to 20. I think the largest class I've had is probably 22, I think, of the 5 classes we've had so far. There's 6 classes coming up. And if you're interested in the 2025 class, then I invite you to join my Planned Giving community online, where I'm sharing tips routinely about planned giving, my thoughts about planned giving. And you can do that easily at plannedgivingaccelerator.com.
And that was I was going to ask you about that community. So you're sharing tips, and are the members of the community sharing as well? What happens inside that community?
It's an email community. So I'm sharing my thinking about planned giving, and I do get a fair number of replies back, folks asking questions. Yeah, but in that's just it's a simple email list.
I'll share with you, Tony. I have always said about our email list, replies is engagement that I love. So friends, if you're on our email list and you reply, I will get your reply. And it might take me a day or two, but I will respond because I'm always like, oh my gosh, someone actually got this and clicked reply and asked me a question or gave me a thought.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Exactly the same. I reply, I get your replies in the community, of course. Yeah.
So I want to be mindful of time. Let's move over to two truths and a lie. Now, I know the last time you were on the podcast, we were still doing the off the map question. We're now doing two truths and a lie. So if you share with me two truths about yourself and a lie, I am going to try my best to figure out the lie.
Okay. I operated nuclear missiles. I am married and live with my wife. I got thrown off a nonprofit board.
Oh, these are hard. So
That's the point.
I know. So I know you had nuclear keys. I don't know if you operated nuclear missials.
I'll help you with that. It's the same.
Oh, okay.
It's the same.
Okay, good.
It's the same.
Okay, because I was like, I don't know the difference. Okay. I'm
married and live with my wife, or I got thrown off a nonprofit board.
This one's tough. So I do think you have a long-term relationship. I think it's residential. I don't know whether or not you're married, but I have a hard time believing you'd be thrown off a nonprofit board.
I'm giving Dolph my poker face right now. I gave him a hint. I gave you a hint on one.
No, absolutely.
Now it's poker face.
Exactly. But so I don't see you getting thrown off a nonprofit board. So I'm going to guess you're not really married.
I am married, and I don't live with my wife. We live in two separate states. We're very happily married. We just have never lived together. And I did get thrown off a nonprofit board.
Okay. So first you have to tell me how much distance is between those two states?
About 650 miles. I'm in North Carolina. She's in Indiana.
That's some distance. Okay. And then second question, you were thrown off a nonprofit board.
Yes, I was. Many years ago, I was an ex officio member of a board because of another position that I had on at that nonprofit, and I told truth to one of the major donors on the board, and she didn't like hearing my truths, and she lobbied for me to be removed. And I was an ex officio member. She was a member. I was ex officio. She was a major donor. I was not, and she put the bug in the ear of the president of the nonprofit to kick me off the board. And he did.
Wow.
So I remain steadfast in what I said at that meeting. And, this was all in public. I explained to her that she was mistaken about some things, and I continue to believe that she's mistaken. So I'm sorry you didn't score on this one.
I often don't. I've grown used to that. It's actually one of the things I like about it is I so often get stumped. People come up with good things. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I want to make sure we're not ending on a down note that I got thrown off a board. It was years ago, and I'm still proud of what I said publicly in the meeting.
I don't view that as a down note at all, but we are going to end on an up note because, friends, I want to make sure that you know how you can reach out to Tony. So there's a couple things. As I mentioned, Tony also has a podcast, Tony Martignetti, Nonprofit Radio. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. And by the way, I know you listen. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find that at TonyMartignetti.com. We're going to put that in the show notes. If you want more information, not just about the Planned Giving Accelerator, but how you can join Tony's Planned Giving community, I suggest you check out PlannedGivingAccelerator.com. And while you're there, again, you can sign up for the community and you will get Tony's insight, tips, thoughts, and ideas about planned giving throughout the year. You will probably also, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, you will probably also get the first opportunity to register the next time the Plan Giving Accelerator is open. It is only open once a year. So, you got to strike when the iron's hot. There comes a point at which it's too late to ask someone to put you in their will. That's the point at which they pass away. And let me say, there comes a point at which it's too late to sign up for the Plan Giving Accelerator. And that's called the last day of February. So you want to make sure that you sign up in the next session. All right, friends, let me just share with you, if you have liked this episode, there's a couple that I'm going to suggest that you listen to. The first is Tony has been on our podcast before, and we're going to link to that episode in the show notes. In that episode, as I shared at the top of this one, we were discussing kind of how to structure your campaign, who to approach, when you as an organization should be thinking about plan giving. If you're interested in that, make sure you listen to that episode. I also suggest that you listen to episode 157, The Generosity Postmortem, Legacy Giving with Lori Kranzer. That, my friend, is our show for the week. I hope that you have gained some insight to help you and your nonprofit thrive. And I wouldn't do this, but gosh, the lawyer really does make me. I'm not an accountant. I'm not an attorney. And neither I nor the consulting practice provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. This podcast is for informational purposes only. And you know what that means, right? It should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. Please, if that is what you need, don't get it from a podcast. Find a licensed, qualified professional in your area and get the help you need.